Across the world's darkest forests, something ancient and unseen watches from the shadows. Camps collapse, hikers vanish, and heavy footsteps echo long after the screams fade. From a Russian livestream cut short by terror to a family's midnight siege in the Texas woods, each event grows more violent. In this video, we'll uncover 6 terrifying encounters that remain unexplained. In the remote Ural mountain region of central Russia, where dense taiga forests stretched endlessly across frozen landscapes, the small village of Verkhoturye sat isolated from modern civilization. The area had long been known among locals for its impenetrable wilderness, where temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius during the winter months, and the snow-covered terrain remained largely unexplored by outsiders. For generations, hunters and trappers had shared whispered tales of strange occurrences in these woods, inexplicable sounds echoing through the pines at dusk, massive tracks appearing overnight in fresh snow, and an unshakable feeling of being observed by something unseen. On November 10, 2025, Dmitry Volkov, a 32-year-old adventure enthusiast from Moscow, embarked on a solo hiking expedition through this forbidding territory. Dmitry had built a modest following by live-streaming his wilderness treks to viewers who enjoyed experiencing remote locations vicariously through his broadcasts. He had spent weeks planning this particular journey, researching routes through the taiga and preparing equipment suitable for the harsh conditions. His goal was straightforward: to traverse a 60-kilometer stretch of virgin forest and document the region's raw, untouched beauty for his audience. The livestream began uneventfully that morning as Dmitry trudged through knee-deep snow, his breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air. For the first several hours, he narrated his progress cheerfully, pointing out frozen streams and ancient pines that towered overhead like silent sentinels. His camera captured the stark magnificence of the landscape, where sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy and shadows pooled in every depression. By early afternoon, he had covered roughly 15 kilometers and paused near a clearing to rest and consume a quick meal of dried meat and bread. It was during this break that Dmitry first noticed something unusual. While adjusting his equipment, he spotted enormous barefoot prints in the snow roughly 20 meters from where he sat. The tracks were unlike anything he had encountered before, nearly 40 centimeters long and twice the width of his own boots, with distinct toe impressions that suggested a bipedal creature of substantial size. Dmitry approached cautiously, filming the prints as he circled them. He mentioned to his viewers that the tracks appeared fresh, with crisp edges that had not yet been softened by wind or falling snow. As he continued hiking, the atmosphere in the forest seemed to shift imperceptibly. The usual sounds of wildlife, distant bird calls, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, had ceased entirely, leaving only the crunch of his footsteps and the whisper of wind through branches. Dmitry commented on this eerie silence, joking nervously that perhaps the forest animals had gone on holiday. However, his tone betrayed a growing unease as he glanced repeatedly over his shoulder at the darkening woods behind him. Around 4 in the afternoon, with daylight already fading, Dmitry stopped abruptly mid-stride. He whispered urgently to the camera that something was moving parallel to his path through the trees, keeping pace with him but remaining just out of clear sight. He described glimpsing a large, dark shape between the pines, something massive and upright that moved with unsettling silence through terrain that should have produced considerable noise. His breathing had quickened noticeably, and he admitted that every instinct was screaming at him to turn back. For the next 20 minutes, Dmitry attempted to maintain his composure while the presence continued shadowing him through the forest. He reported hearing heavy footfalls that seemed to circle his position, always staying just beyond visual range. Then, without warning, the live stream feed cut to black. Technical difficulties were not uncommon in such remote locations, but the abrupt nature of the disconnection concerned his regular viewers, several of whom contacted Russian authorities after hours passed without Dmitry re-establishing contact. A search team departed from Verkhoturye the following morning, using Dmitry's last known coordinates to navigate to the area where his broadcast had ended. They discovered his backpack and equipment arranged with peculiar care beside a large pine tree, his sleeping bag folded neatly, his cooking supplies stacked in an orderly pile, and his boots placed side by side as if someone had deliberately organized the scene. The discovery deeply unsettled the searchers, who noted that the arrangement seemed intentional rather than the result of a panicked struggle or animal attack. The massive barefoot prints Dmitri had filmed earlier now formed a clear trail leading away from the site toward a nearby frozen river. The searchers followed these tracks for approximately 2 kilometers downstream, where the prints eventually led them to Dmitri's body. He lay half-submerged in shallow water near the riverbank, his feet bare despite the freezing conditions, and his body bearing severe trauma consistent with substantial force. What disturbed the search team most was the complete absence of secondary tracks in the surrounding snow, as if Dmitri had been placed there without anyone else approaching on foot. The scene revealed additional anomalies that defied easy explanation. Several young saplings along the riverbank had been bent into rough arcs, their trunks manipulated with considerable strength yet not broken. Deep vertical gouges marked the bark of larger trees, scored into the wood at heights exceeding 3 meters. A thick, musky odor permeated the area, an organic smell that searchers described as similar to wet animal fur mixed with something earthier and more pungent. Local authorities officially attributed Dmitri's death to exposure and hypothermia, suggesting he had become disoriented in the wilderness and succumbed to the elements. However, residents of Verkhoturye rejected this explanation, citing the deliberately arranged equipment and the nature of the tracks as evidence of something more disturbing. In the weeks following the incident, the valley where Dmitri died acquired a sinister reputation among villagers. Hunters now refused to enter that section of forest, reporting that at dusk, slow and rhythmic knocks echoed between the trees, 3 measured strikes repeated at intervals, as if something large was announcing its presence to anything that dared trespass in its domain. The Cascade foothills of eastern Oregon had long been a favored destination for hunters seeking elk and deer during the autumn months. The region's dense pine forests and remote valleys offered excellent game populations, though locals had always harbored a certain wariness about venturing too deep into the wilderness. Stories passed down through generations spoke of strange occurrences in the most isolated areas, unexplained sounds, massive tracks that appeared overnight, and an unsettling sensation of being watched by something hidden among the trees. On October 15, 2024, a group of 4 experienced hunters established camp in a secluded valley approximately 40 kilometers from the nearest logging road. The team consisted of Marcus Brenwald, a 41-year-old contractor from Portland, his younger brother Silas Brenwald, and 2 longtime friends, Garrett Holbrook and Vernon Kepler. They had hunted this general area for nearly a decade, though this particular valley was new territory for them. The location seemed ideal, a natural clearing surrounded by towering pines with a small creek providing fresh water and several game trails converging nearby. The hunters spent the daylight hours scouting the surrounding forest and preparing their camp. They pitched 3 tents in a rough triangle around a central fire pit, secured their gear, and prepared an evening meal as darkness descended over the valley. The night began quietly enough, with the men sharing stories around the campfire and discussing their strategy for the following morning's hunt. Around 11 in the evening, they extinguished the fire and retired to their tents, expecting nothing more eventful than a cold night under clear skies. Shortly after midnight, Marcus was jolted awake by a sound that seemed to reverberate through the entire valley. 3 slow, deliberate knocks that echoed between the trees with unnatural clarity. The strikes were evenly spaced, each one resonating like wood striking against wood with considerable force. He lay still in his sleeping bag, listening intently as the knocks repeated twice more at intervals of roughly 30 seconds. The sound was impossible to pinpoint directionally, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Marcus emerged from his tent to find his companions already awake and equally disturbed by the noise. Garrett suggested it might be a woodpecker or some natural phenomenon, though his tone indicated he did not believe his own explanation. The men stood in the clearing, scanning the dark tree line with their flashlights, when Vernon suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm and pointed toward the forest's edge. A massive shadow had materialized there, an upright shape that towered at least 2.5 meters tall, visible only as a darker silhouette against the black pines behind it. Before anyone could react, a boulder the size of a small television crashed down the slope behind their tents, rolling past within meters of where Silas had been sleeping moments before. The impact shook the ground perceptibly, and the men scrambled toward their tents for weapons and better lighting. Another boulder followed seconds later, this one striking a large pine tree with tremendous force before bouncing sideways to demolish their carefully stacked firewood pile. The projectiles were not falling randomly. Each seemed deliberately aimed to land near the camp without directly striking any of the hunters. Marcus ordered everyone to remain inside the tents, while he attempted to illuminate the area more effectively with a high-powered spotlight. As the beam swept across the clearing's perimeter, he observed enormous barefoot prints encircling their camp in precise arcs, each track measuring at least 40 centimeters in length. Several branches had been bent into unnatural configurations, some twisted into crude semicircles while others bore deep vertical scratches carved into the wood at heights no human could reach without climbing. Throughout the night, the assault continued sporadically. Boulders would crash down at irregular intervals, always landing close enough to terrify but never quite striking the tents directly. Between impacts, the hunters heard low, rhythmic thumping sounds emanating from the darkness, a deliberate percussion that seemed designed to communicate dominance or territoriality. Occasionally, these thuds were punctuated by deep, guttural exhalations that resembled no animal sound any of the men recognized. As dawn finally broke over the valley, the attacks ceased abruptly. The massive shadow had vanished, leaving behind only the evidence of its presence: scattered boulders, bent vegetation, and those enormous tracks circling the camp. The hunters wasted no time in breaking camp and retreating to their vehicles, abandoning several pieces of equipment in their haste to leave the valley. Marcus later reported to local authorities that something intelligent and immensely powerful had methodically terrorized them throughout the night, testing their responses without ever quite crossing the line into lethal violence. In the months following the incident, other hunters began reporting similar experiences in that particular valley. Locals now avoid the area entirely, warning newcomers that boulders sometimes tumble down the hillsides there for no natural reason whatsoever, and that the forest itself seems to be watching, waiting for the next group foolish enough to camp where they are not welcome. The remote forests of central Russia's Perm region had witnessed countless tragedies throughout history, from travelers lost to blizzards, to hunters who simply vanished without explanation. The area's dense taiga stretched for hundreds of kilometers, broken only occasionally by frozen streams and rocky outcroppings. Winter temperatures regularly dropped below -40 degrees Celsius, creating conditions where survival depended entirely on proper preparation and respect for the environment's lethal indifference. On January 28, 2017, 3 experienced hikers departed from the village of Cherdyn for what was intended as a 5-day winter trek through the surrounding wilderness. The group consisted of Anatoly Chekhov, a 37-year-old engineer from Perm, Mikhail Oreshin, a 42-year-old forestry consultant, and Pavel Kludov, a 34-year-old photographer documenting Russia's remote regions. All 3 men had extensive winter camping experience and carried equipment rated for extreme cold conditions. Their planned route would take them through approximately 70 kilometers of pristine forest before looping back to civilization. The first 2 days proceeded according to schedule, with the hikers making good progress despite deep snow and occasional whiteout conditions. They established camps at predetermined waypoints, maintained regular contact with their emergency coordinator via satellite phone, and documented their journey through Pavel's photography. On the evening of January 30th, they made their scheduled check-in call, reporting that they had reached a sheltered valley and would camp there before attempting a challenging ascent the following morning. That call was their last communication. When the hikers failed to check in on January 31st, local authorities organized a search party that departed at first light on February 1st. The search team, consisting of experienced mountain rescue personnel and local guides familiar with the terrain, used GPS coordinates from the final satellite call to navigate directly to the hikers' last known position. What they discovered defied all conventional understanding of wilderness deaths. The 3 bodies were scattered across a frozen slope roughly 200 meters from where the hikers had established their final camp. All 3 men were completely naked, their clothing found in scattered piles near the campsite rather than on their bodies. Medical examination would later reveal minimal frostbite damage, far less than would be expected from exposure severe enough to cause death in such conditions. The scene displayed numerous anomalies that deeply disturbed the search team. The hikers' backpacks and equipment had been arranged with strange precision around the abandoned campsite. Boots were placed side by side in neat rows. Ropes had been carefully coiled into perfect circles, and backpacks stood upright as if someone had deliberately organized them for inspection. This meticulous arrangement stood in stark contrast to the chaos one would expect from a desperate emergency. More unsettling were the tracks leading away from the scene. Enormous barefoot prints, measuring approximately 45 centimeters long and proportionally wide, formed a clear trail into the dense trees beyond the slope. The prints were far too large to be human and showed distinct toe impressions suggesting a bipedal creature of considerable mass. The tracks created wide arcs through the snow, circling the area where the bodies were found, before disappearing into the forest depths. Several trees near the scene bore unmistakable evidence of something powerful marking its territory. Deep vertical scratches gouged into the bark extended well above 3 meters from ground level, carved with such force that wood splinters still clung to the wounds. Young saplings had been bent outward into crude semicircles, their trunks manipulated without breaking them, a feat requiring substantial strength and seemingly deliberate intent. The search team reported that a pungent, earthy musk permeated the entire area, an organic smell that reminded them of wet fur mixed with something more primitive and wild. Despite the presence of multiple searchers, the forest remained eerily silent throughout the investigation. Normal wilderness sounds, bird calls, wind rustling through branches, the crack of ice on distant streams, were notably absent, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As the searchers worked to document the scene and recover the bodies, several team members reported hearing low, deliberate knocks emanating from the surrounding trees. The sounds occurred in sets of 3, evenly spaced and resonating with unnatural clarity through the frozen air. These were accompanied occasionally by deep, guttural exhalations that resembled no known animal vocalization. Official reports attributed the deaths to acute hypothermia combined with a phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing, where severely hypothermic individuals remove their clothing due to confusion and impaired judgment. However, this explanation failed to account for the organized equipment, the massive tracks, the territorial markings on trees, or the deliberate arrangement of the victims' possessions. Local residents of Churden rejected the official narrative entirely. Village elders spoke of similar incidents occurring throughout the region's history. Experienced outdoorsmen found dead under inexplicable circumstances, always in winter, always in the deepest sections of forest. They warned outsiders that certain areas of the taiga belonged to something ancient and territorial, something that tolerated human presence only up to a point before enforcing its claim to the land. In the years since the incident, the valley where Anatoly, Mikhail, and Pavel died has acquired a reputation as forbidden ground. Hunters and trappers who once traveled through the area now take lengthy detours to avoid it, claiming that the woods there move silently and watch anyone foolish enough to enter. Some report seeing massive shadows between the trees at dusk, upright figures that observe intruders briefly before vanishing without sound into the deepening darkness. The coastal mountains of British Columbia represented some of North America's most pristine and inaccessible wilderness. Dense old-growth forest blanketed steep slopes where centuries-old cedars and Douglas firs created canopies so thick that sunlight barely reached the forest floor. The region's remoteness made it ideal for wildlife populations, but challenging for researchers attempting to document ecological conditions. Modern drone technology has revolutionized this work, allowing surveyors to gather data from areas that would require days of difficult hiking to reach on foot. On September 22, 2025, Jasper Thornquist, a 39-year-old ecological surveyor contracted by provincial environmental agencies, was conducting aerial mapping of a particularly isolated forest section approximately 60 kilometers northeast of a small coastal settlement. Jasper had spent the previous week establishing base camps and methodically surveying adjacent areas, documenting wildlife corridors, vegetation density, and geological features for conservation planning purposes. The morning had proceeded routinely as Jasper guided his high-resolution drone through predetermined flight paths, capturing both still imagery and video of the canopy below. Around late afternoon, he directed the drone toward a natural clearing he had identified earlier, an opening in the forest roughly 40 meters across where fallen trees had created a gap allowing sunlight to penetrate to ground level. Such clearings often attracted wildlife and provided valuable data about forest regeneration patterns. As the drone reached the clearing and descended to approximately 15 meters altitude for detailed imagery, Jasper noticed the aircraft beginning to vibrate violently. The behavior was unusual given the calm conditions and clear skies. His control screen showed all systems functioning normally, yet the drone continued shuddering, and the controls began failing intermittently. The video feed flickered briefly before cutting out entirely. Moments before losing the feed completely, Jasper glimpsed something through the unstable transmission that made him lean closer to his monitor. Enormous footprints appeared to cross the clearing below, far larger than any human footprint and distinctly bipedal, rather than the four-footed impressions left by bears or other wildlife. The image was there for only seconds before the feed died completely. Without warning, all signal was cut off. Jasper's control screen indicated total signal loss, despite the drone being well within range and having full battery power remaining. He attempted standard reconnection protocols without success, watching helplessly as all telemetry data disappeared from his instruments. After 10 minutes of failed attempts to re-establish contact, he gathered his equipment and hiked toward the clearing's approximate location, determined to recover the expensive drone and understand what had caused such catastrophic system failure. The trek through dense undergrowth took nearly 40 minutes, but Jasper eventually emerged at the clearing's edge. What he found there immediately unsettled him. The drone rested at the far side of the opening, positioned carefully on flat ground but completely inverted, sitting on its rotors with the camera assembly pointing skyward. This orientation was impossible through any accidental landing or crash scenario. Something had deliberately turned the aircraft upside down after it landed or fell. Jasper approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding tree line while moving toward his drone. The device appeared physically undamaged. No broken rotors, no cracked housing, no signs of impact trauma that would explain its sudden failure. However, as he knelt to examine it more closely, he noticed the ground around the clearing had been significantly disturbed. Multiple sets of enormous barefoot prints crisscrossed the area, each measuring at least 45 centimeters long, with clearly defined toe impressions. The tracks formed wide arcs around the clearing's perimeter before converging near where the drone now rested. Several young saplings at the forest edge had been bent outward into unnatural configurations, their trunks curved but not broken. Larger trees bore deep vertical gouges carved into their bark at heights exceeding 3 meters, marks that appeared deliberately placed rather than incidental damage from animals or weather. A thick, pungent odor hung in the air throughout the clearing. The smell was distinctly organic, similar to wet animal fur but with earthier, muskier undertones that Jasper found deeply unpleasant. The scent seemed concentrated near the bent saplings and gouged trees, as if whatever had created these markings had also left its scent as a territorial marker. As Jasper examined the scene, he experienced an overwhelming sensation of being observed. The feeling was so intense and persistent that he found himself repeatedly turning to scan the shadowed forest behind him, convinced that something massive watched from concealment among the dense vegetation. The forest had fallen unnaturally silent. No bird calls, no rustling of small mammals, no ambient sounds beyond his own breathing and footsteps. He attempted to launch the drone again, hoping to escape the clearing and return to base camp. The aircraft powered on normally and all systems appeared functional, but the moment he attempted to initiate flight, the motors stuttered and died. 3 more attempts produced identical results. The drone would power up successfully, but refused to take flight when commanded. Only when Jasper carried the device approximately 100 meters away from the clearing did it finally respond normally, lifting off without difficulty and maintaining stable flight. Jasper reported the incident to his supervisors and described the anomalies he had encountered. He provided detailed verbal descriptions of the massive tracks and tree damage, along with notes about the drone's inexplicable malfunction within the clearing. The drone's internal storage had been completely corrupted. All footage from that afternoon was irretrievable, showing only static and digital artifacts when technicians attempted recovery. His report generated considerable discussion among the surveying team, particularly when other operators reported similar equipment failures in adjacent sections of forest, always in isolated clearings, always accompanied by that same pungent musk, always leaving personnel with the distinct impression of being watched by something just beyond visual range, and always resulting in corrupted or completely lost footage from their devices. Local residents familiar with the area were unsurprised by Jasper's experience. They had long maintained that certain sections of the deep forest were alive in ways that defied conventional explanation. The trees themselves seemed to shift silently when no one was looking, they claimed, and something ancient and territorial moved through those woods, something that did not appreciate intrusion by modern technology or curious outsiders. Jasper never returned to that particular clearing, though he often wondered what had possessed the intelligence to deliberately invert his drone and the power to interfere with its electronic systems through means he could not begin to explain. The dense pine forests of eastern Texas had always maintained a reputation for isolation, despite being located in one of America's most populous states. The region known locally as the Big Thicket encompassed thousands of square kilometers of wilderness, where towering loblolly pines created shadowed corridors and thick undergrowth limited visibility to mere meters. During summer months, the humidity hung so heavy that the air itself seemed to press down on travelers, and the forest canopy blocked enough sunlight to create perpetual twilight beneath the trees. On June 17, 2023, the Pemberton family departed from their home in suburban Houston for a weekend camping trip deep in this isolated woodland. The family consisted of Randall Pemberton, a 43-year-old accountant, his wife Clarice, their teenage daughter Noelle, and their 12-year-old son Desmond. They traveled in a 30-foot recreational vehicle that Randall had purchased specifically for such excursions, equipped with all modern amenities and sleeping accommodations for 4. The family had researched various camping locations before selecting a particular tract of forest approximately 15 kilometers from the nearest maintained road. The site was accessible only via an old logging trail barely wide enough for the RV, but it promised complete solitude and pristine natural surroundings. They arrived late Friday afternoon, established their campsite in a natural clearing beside a small creek, and spent the evening preparing dinner and enjoying the peaceful forest atmosphere. Desmond complained that the woods felt too quiet, no birds singing, no insects buzzing, just an oppressive silence broken only by the creek's gentle burbling. Randall dismissed this observation as imagination, though he privately noted that the forest did seem unusually still compared to other locations they had visited. The family retired to the RV around 10 in the evening, secure in the vehicle's locked doors and comfortable beds. At approximately 2 in the morning, Clarice jolted awake to a tremendous thud that shook the entire recreational vehicle. She initially assumed a large branch had fallen from one of the towering pines surrounding their campsite, a common enough occurrence in forests where dead wood regularly broke free during windless nights. Before she could fully process this thought, another impact struck the RV's roof, this one accompanied by a distinct rolling sound as something heavy bounced across the metal surface. Randall was awake now as well, along with both children, who emerged from the rear sleeping area looking frightened. A third impact hit the side of the vehicle hard enough to rock it noticeably on its suspension. This strike came from something thrown horizontally rather than falling from above, and the metallic clang it produced suggested considerable force behind the projectile. Randall moved quickly to the driver's area and activated the RV's exterior floodlights, illuminating the clearing in harsh white light. What he glimpsed through the windshield made his breath catch. At the tree line roughly 20 meters away, an enormous upright figure stood partially obscured by shadow. The shape towered at least 2.5 meters tall, with massive shoulders and arms that seemed disproportionately long compared to human proportions. As Randall stared, the figure bent down, lifted what appeared to be a boulder the size of a barrel, with apparently minimal effort, and dropped it deliberately toward the RV. The rock landed 3 meters from the vehicle, striking the ground with enough force to create a visible impact crater. The assault continued with methodical precision over the next several hours. Rocks and small logs bombarded the recreational vehicle at irregular intervals, each impact targeted to land near but never directly strike the family inside. Some projectiles bounced off the roof, others thudded against the sides, and several crashed into the ground immediately adjacent to the wheels. The pattern was too deliberate to be random. Whoever or whatever was throwing these objects possessed both intelligence and restraint, terrorizing the occupants without quite crossing into lethal violence. Clarice attempted to call for help using her mobile phone, but the remote location provided no cellular signal. Randall considered attempting to drive out, but the narrow logging trail and complete darkness beyond the floodlights made that option seem impossibly dangerous. The family huddled together in the center of the RV, jumping at each new impact and praying for sunrise. Between bombardments, they could hear other sounds emanating from the darkness. Heavy footsteps circled the vehicle with surprising silence, given the size of whatever was making them. Occasionally, deep exhalations resembling no animal sound they recognized punctuated the night. Several times they heard low thumping sounds that seemed to come from multiple directions simultaneously, as if more than one creature was present in the surrounding forest. As dawn finally broke over the clearing, the attacks ceased abruptly. Randall waited until full daylight before cautiously stepping outside to assess the damage. The exterior of the RV was dented in multiple locations but remained structurally sound. Scattered around the vehicle lay dozens of rocks and logs, some weighing what he estimated to be 30 or 40 kilograms, projectiles that would have required enormous strength to throw with the force he had witnessed. The ground around the RV told a disturbing story. Massive barefoot tracks circled the vehicle in precise arcs, each print measuring at least 40 centimeters long, with clearly defined toe impressions. The tracks led from the clearing into the forest, where Randall discovered that several young saplings had been bent outward into crude semicircles. Larger pines bore deep vertical gouges carved into their bark at heights he could not reach, even standing on tiptoe. A thick, musky odor clung to the entire area, an organic smell that reminded him of a zoo's primate enclosure, but stronger and more pungent. The family made the decision to abandon their weekend plans immediately. Randall carefully maneuvered the RV back along the narrow logging trail while Clarice and the children remained silent and watchful. They reported the incident to local authorities once they reached an area with phone reception, but sheriff's deputies who investigated found only the tracks and tree damage to corroborate the family's account. The Pembertons never returned to collect several items of camping equipment they had left behind in their haste to evacuate. The RV itself was sold within a month, as Clarice could not bear to sleep in it again after that night. Noel developed persistent nightmares about massive figures watching from forest shadows, while Desmond became adamant that he would never go camping again under any circumstances. Local residents who heard about the incident were unsurprised, sharing similar stories of strange occurrences in the deepest sections of the forest. They warned that the woods came alive at night in that region, that rhythmic knocks echoed between the trees after dark, and that something moved through the darkness with intelligence and strength far beyond any known wildlife. The clearing where the Pembertons camped remains abandoned, marked now by rusted camping equipment and the slowly fading tracks of something that preferred to remain hidden, but occasionally reminded humans that they were not welcome in its domain. Northern Ontario's vast wilderness contained thousands of remote lakes and waterways that remained largely untouched by human development. The region's dense boreal forest stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by these bodies of water that reflected the sky like scattered mirrors across the landscape. Summer months brought fishermen and outdoor enthusiasts to the more accessible locations, but the deepest wilderness areas saw few visitors beyond the occasional adventurous souls seeking complete isolation from civilization. On August 8, 2020, search and rescue teams converged on one such remote lake after a father and son had been reported missing for 3 days. Thaddeus Morwick, a 51-year-old telecommunications engineer from Toronto, and his 17-year-old son Callum had departed on what was intended as a week-long fishing and camping expedition. When they failed to check in via satellite phone at their scheduled time, and when 2 additional days passed without contact, Thaddeus's wife contacted authorities to initiate a search operation. The search coordinator, a veteran wilderness rescue specialist named Bryce Kellerman, assembled a team of 12 experienced searchers, including tracking experts, boat operators, and medical personnel. The team departed at first light on August 11th, using GPS coordinates from the Morwick's last known satellite communication to navigate directly to the remote lake where they had planned to camp. The search party arrived at the lake's southern shore around noon, immediately spotting the Morwick's aluminum boat floating approximately 30 meters from shore. The vessel appeared intact and undamaged, drifting slowly with the light breeze. When searchers retrieved the boat, they discovered the Morwick's fishing equipment, camping supplies, and personal belongings arranged with peculiar precision. Rods were laid parallel to each other, tackle boxes were closed and stacked neatly, and backpacks sat upright with their contents organized rather than scattered. This meticulous arrangement struck the searchers as inconsistent with an emergency or accidental abandonment. Bryce directed the team to begin combing the shoreline while maintaining visual contact with each other. The forest pressed close to the water's edge, creating shadowed zones where visibility dropped to mere meters despite the bright afternoon sun. Within an hour, trackers discovered enormous barefoot prints in the soft mud along the shore. Prints that measured approximately 45 centimeters long and showed distinct toe impressions, suggesting a bipedal creature of substantial mass. The tracks led from the water's edge directly into the dense forest, forming a clear trail that the search team decided to follow. As they moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere seemed to change perceptibly. A thick fog had begun rolling in off the lake despite the clear sky, and the temperature dropped noticeably as moisture condensed on every surface. The forest's usual ambient sounds, birds calling, branches creaking, insects buzzing, had ceased entirely, leaving only the searchers' footsteps and breathing to break the oppressive silence. Approximately 200 meters inland, one of the forward scouts named Helena Griggs suddenly stopped and raised her hand to halt the group. She pointed silently toward a gap between 2 massive pines where the fog swirled in slow eddies. Standing there, partially obscured by mist and shadow, was an enormous upright figure. The shape towered at least 2.5 meters tall, with proportions that were distinctly not human. Shoulders too broad, arms too long, posture too hunched. It stood completely motionless, observing the search team with apparent interest but making no aggressive movements. Helena later reported that she made direct eye contact with the figure for approximately 5 seconds before it turned and vanished into the forest without making a sound. The silence of its departure was perhaps more unsettling than its appearance. Something that massive should have produced considerable noise, crashing through undergrowth and snapping branches, yet it moved as if it weighed nothing at all. The search team continued forward cautiously, now acutely aware that they were not alone in the forest. The massive footprints they had been following became more numerous, suggesting multiple individuals rather than a single creature. Several young trees along their path had been bent outward into unnatural curves, their trunks manipulated, but not broken. Larger pines bore deep vertical scratches carved into bark at heights exceeding 3 meters, marks that appeared deliberately placed as territorial warnings. A thick musky odor permeated the entire area, an organic smell that reminded searchers of wet fur, mixed with something earthier and more primitive. The scent grew stronger as they moved deeper into the forest, concentrating particularly around areas where the tracks converged. Low, deliberate thumping sounds began echoing through the trees, originating from various directions, and creating the impression that the search team was being surrounded by unseen observers. Bryce made the difficult decision to maintain the search despite the increasingly bizarre circumstances. However, as the fog thickened and daylight began fading, he ordered the team to return to the shore and establish a base camp. They would resume searching at first light with additional personnel and equipment. Throughout the remainder of that day, and during subsequent searches over the next week, the team found no trace of Thaddeus or Callum Morwick beyond their abandoned boat and organized supplies. The forest seemed to actively resist their effort. Equipment malfunctioned in inexplicable ways. GPS devices provided incorrect coordinates. Radios experienced static interference despite a clear line of sight, and compasses spun erratically as if magnetic north had shifted. Search dogs brought in to track scents refused to enter certain sections of the forest, whining and backing away despite encouragement from their handlers. Several searchers reported glimpsing massive shadows moving between trees, always at the edge of visibility and always vanishing before they could be clearly observed. On the 5th day of searching, as the operation was being scaled back due to diminishing chances of finding survivors, 3 team members simultaneously reported seeing an enormous upright figure standing on a rocky outcropping approximately 100 meters from their position. The figure remained visible for nearly a minute this time, clearly silhouetted against the sky, before turning and descending the far side of the rocks with movements that suggested both intelligence and deliberate intent to be observed. The search was officially concluded on August 16th, with the Morwicks classified as missing, presumed dead, though no bodies had been recovered. The final report documented the strange circumstances surrounding the disappearance, but offered no definitive explanation for what had occurred. Local indigenous communities familiar with the area were unsurprised by the outcome, stating that certain lakes and forests belonged to something ancient that did not welcome human intrusion. In the months following the search, several team members reported recurring nightmares about being watched by unseen presences in dense forest. Helena Griggs left the search and rescue service entirely, unable to shake the memory of making eye contact with that massive figure in the fog. Bryce Kellerman, despite decades of wilderness experience, now refuses assignments in that particular region of northern Ontario, telling colleagues that the forest there is alive in ways he cannot adequately explain, and that whatever inhabits those woods prefers to remain undiscovered.